Welcome to the place where you can find answers for your problems happens in everyday life. Today we're going to talk about married couples are struggling with relationship issues, mental health challenges, depression and anxiety. Dr. Jordan B. Peterson and Dr. John Delony gives practical advice on how to take the right step and how to cut through the depression and anxiety that can feel so overwhelming.
When my wife comes to me on a Monday and says, hey, this weekend, you and me, we're going to go on the hottest date. And then she just walks away. Monday night, I'm wondering where we're going. Tuesday night, I'm wondering what I'm wearing and for how long, right? By Wednesday and Thursday, I'm wondering who's going to keep the kids, and I don't care because they're going to be fine, and what hotel we're going to end up at. And then Saturday comes along, and I show up in a suit, and she shows up in her running shorts and a t-shirt. And I say, what are you doing? And she says, what are you doing? And I say, I thought we were going on a hot date. And she says, it's seven tacos for $10 down at Taco Hut. We're going on a hot date. Hey, I love tacos, and I hope she loves the occasional rendezvous, but we both used the word date, and we had very different pictures. Now, I'm upset, she's upset, and so in my house, every single day of the week, every day I'm not on the road, we ask ourselves this question: hey, what's the picture of today look like? It's just become a vernacular in our home. And so when she says, I need some space this evening, I need some time by myself, I tend to go, okay, cool. After dinner and after the kids and after you're done writing I won't hassle you for the last 8 minutes of the day. For her, she's thinking, the moment you walk in this house, I'm out and I might come back in a week, right? We just have to align our pictures, and I'm cool either way and she's cool either way. It's just managing those expectations and being so clear with one another.
Yeah, well, that's exactly the process of defining a shared vision. And one of the things that's lovely about that is it makes you're not reactive then. So you're not the thing that's being chased by the monster or the dread. You're the thing that's actively conceptualizing the manner in which the future is going to shape itself. And what you have is the delightful opportunity to share a joint vision that in principle would be better for both of you than anything you could do alone. Like you said, that all the data shows that one of the best things you can do in your life to maximize your long-term health and increase your probability of at least some joy is to have a functional, long-term, intimate relationship. And so you have to attend to that. And a huge part of that is the development of these shared visions. And it's really useful to develop microvisions. And so
what would you tell clients back in the day when they would come to you and they'd have a 3-year-old and they would have and they have an infant, they have child number 2, and they would say, we're not having sex anymore. We have like an intimacy. We become co-managers of our house. And your response as a clinical psychologist would be, you've got to schedule it. You got to put it on the calendar. And the response always is, I don't want to do that anymore.
That's a great question. Well, my first response is, well, how often do you want to have sex? And people hate that. People hate that question. And so they avoid it. They say, well, we don't really want to be that calculating about it. It's like, okay, right, whatever. We're going to parameterize this. Once a year. It's like, no, that's probably too little. Okay, 15 times a day. It's like, no, that's probably too much. Okay, so now we got some parameters here. It's somewhere between once a year and 15 times a day. Let's see if we can narrow that in. And this does make people uncomfortable, right? They don't want to specify their needs and wants.
What's the source of that discomfort? Where does that come from?
I think they're embarrassed that they need anything. Like it's that same exposure of nakedness. And then they're unwilling to share the information with their partner because it's revealing. And then they're afraid they're going to be rebuffed. And they're afraid they're going to get into a fight. They've got lots of reasons not to want to do it.
And that rolls back to those stories that have been haunting them since they were kids, right?
Yeah. And they don't want to have the difficult conversation up front. And so we might say, well, okay, let's be reasonable about this. It's going to be some number of times a week. You guys have jobs, you have kids, you're busy. You're not going to have a hot date every night. You just don't have time for it. And so why don't we be reasonable about it? We could let's aim for something like twice a week. It's like, can you think? Or maybe we could start with once a week. Because once is a lot more than 0. It's a lot more than 0. Right. And so then you think, well, all right. And then they say something like, well, we did all that dating when we were dating, and now we don't want to do that anymore. It's like, okay, so what are you saying here exactly? You're saying that You don't want any more romance, and you don't want any more hot sex, and you don't want to put any work into it, and it's just going to happen magically, even though it's clearly not happening. That's your theory. And then let's run that theory out. Okay, so now you have new kids, and it's going to be like that for a few years, maybe till they're 10 or 11. You're going to be occupied with your family. And so now you have a sexless marriage with no intimacy for a decade. So what does that look like in like 2032 when you're in divorce court?
Right.
How's that?
Or you're recovering from some addiction, right?
Right. So
of work or of alcohol or whatever it is, because your body's got to meet that need somewhere. And if it can't get it a true deep connection, it will come up with all kind of cheap substitutes, right?
Yeah, like an affair.
That's right.
Yeah, so of course you don't want to do this because it requires difficult negotiation. But how would you like to have your marriage deteriorate into hell over a 10-year period? How does that sound as an alternative? It's like, well, that's not very good. It's like, okay, so which of these two things are you more afraid of? And then when people really think that through, they think, oh yeah, well maybe, I could take the risk of making what I want known. And then, okay, so now you specify it. Well, a date, which night? How long? Are you going to find a babysitter? Are you going to do this every week? Who's going to be responsible for what in relationship to this date? All these details have to be negotiated. And then we remember, by the same logic that we've already employed, if this is 2 hours a week, then that's 15% of one day. That's another 5% of your life. And it's the intimate part of your life. And if you got that right, my God, you might be a much happier person. And so that's another one of the only 25 things you have to take care of to set your life up. But I mean, you said, why are people afraid to do this? Is they're afraid to show their vulnerability. Man, they don't trust their partner. They don't know how to negotiate. They don't even know what they want themselves. Like, it's not that easy for someone to admit that they need any physical attention at all, even though everyone obviously does. Because you're putting yourself on the line then. And that is the definition of intimacy in some sense.
I can't tell you, and I know you've experienced this too, whether it's a single mom with 3 kids just trying to figure out what day it is, or it's a multi-millionaire who's got resources that far exceed anything I could imagine. I've rarely sat down across from somebody and had them be able to articulate, what do you actually want? They cannot answer that question, and they fill it with addictions, they fill it with hobbies, they fill it with dopamine chase. They fill it with so much stuff, and nobody can answer that question. What do you want? Because we just don't have a culture that has a shared vision of where we're headed. We have a culture of you're hurting and somebody else's fault, and let's start pointing fingers. And man, we've got to circle the wagons on a shared vision moving forward.
Yeah.
Because there's what do you want? No, that's not a question anybody asks. It's what do I don't want, and why am I feeling just uncomfortable? It's because of them. It's because of him. It's because of her.
Well, then if it's what you don't want, you're driven by negative emotion. Eh? If you're driven by a vision, that's positive emotion, because approaching something positive in a visionary manner generates positive emotion. If you're only fleeing from things you don't want, then you're constantly in a state of anxiety and depression.
Where did that go? Where did we lose a shared vision? Why can't somebody put a flag in the ground and say, this is where we're headed? That seems to be gone.
Yeah, well, that's a complicated question, I mean, I would say that's the consequence in the most fundamental sense of the death of God in the most fundamental way. It's the death of a sense of higher order unity, eh?
That's a wrap of this video. Hope if you gained some piece of information in this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And don't forget to share with your friends. Thanks for watching. See you next time.